Thank you so much, Alexandre. That was beautiful because you tied up so many images and themes that we've been discussing today, especially the margins. You know, you talked about the margins, and I think Aruni would probably want to talk about that as well in terms of language and the margins that you opened the discussion as well, Aruni. And then you talked about anger, and Pratibha's film was made using that anger as well.
And when I hear Aruni talking about storytelling, that really struck me as very, very important. So that's why I love to just listen to people. I find the same spirit as we did before when we had so many conferences and so many. I know that as an artist, my medium is more being on the background and using shapes and sounds and stuff. So
that's wonderful. And you also mentioned turning back the gaze. Again, I'm going back to Pratibha, who was talking about this decolonization of the gaze, and she mentioned that. So what we had imagined with Sylvia was that the four of you can now be in conversation and that we listen to you. If you would like to comment on each other's work or ask questions, and probably Sylvia is going to translate from Spanish to English. Yeah.
Sí, solo un ratito para Ochi. Bueno, pensábamos que quizás los que han hablado puedan hacer unas preguntas sobre el trabajo que han escuchado aquí. No sé si tienen unas preguntas para los otros ponentes, y si tienen una pregunta nosotros la vamos a traducir. Así, bueno, Aruni tiene una pregunta. Aruni, I can see that you have your hand up, but you want to go first. Y yo voy a intentar traducir en el chat, okay, in the messenger. Okay.
Yeah, I don't really want to go first. I just wanted to add something to what Alex said. Alex, you know, I think all kinds of art, including drawing, painting, journalism, I think they are all different modes of storytelling. So I think one cannot exist without, I don't think we can appreciate fiction or poetry or essays or films without your work. So I think it's an amazing thing that we are all brought together who work in different mediums. And I think stories travel and create conversations. And that is why we need art. I mean, I feel like I'm saying very basic things, but I wanted to say that you are not in the background. You are very much equally in the same space. We can't exist if you don't exist, you know, if you don't produce the work you are doing. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
So, and I don't really necessarily have to go first, but I'm really stimulated by everybody. So, but anybody can please contribute.
I think like Alexandra, I'm really, it's just so great to be able to listen to you all and to hear about your own art practices and what, you know, what it's informed by your personal histories. And so I'm just, you know, really grateful to be here, to be able to listen to everyone. And what it makes me, you know, sort of what it helps me to also do is to kind of, it reaffirms, because so often as artists, as filmmakers or as writers, we're very isolated. We're very much in our own kind of little worlds, creating our images, creating our writing or whatever. And having this kind of common agenda, as it were, across all these geopolitical kind of histories and boundaries, that we are all actually very much collectively creating bodies of art and writing and discursive kind of conversations that are so much about building bodies of decolonial kind of studies, that where art is and artistic practices and you know, what I say about my work is that it's like with every piece of work that I do, every film I make, I'm always thinking about how is this a place or of visual justice? How am I creating? What is, you know, that is my kind of, I suppose that's my bottom line, is to say that how is this work that I am creating and trying to create, how is this going to help the kind of agenda of visual justice? How do we begin to create justice within the frame, within the juxtapositions of different kinds of images, with the different kinds of shapes and colors, with the different kinds of words that are constructed to tell different stories? And I think that we all share that. And, you know, one of the things that Ochi was saying at the beginning was about how she distances herself from the word queer because when it does not embody in any way a kind of anti-racist, anti-colonial perspective within it or understanding within it. And I think that that, you know, it's really spoke very much to me too. And I think to so many of us that we've sort of, I know personally, I've had to go through this journey of rejecting that word because it's become something that has lost all meaning, particularly when we're coming from where we kind of bring histories of anti-colonial struggles and anti-racist struggles. And when that is not, you know, I'm not interested in movements for LGBT rights, which is asking for equality within the military industrial complex. That is not something that I resonate with, that I want to be associated with. And if queer is the way in which that embodies that as a right to kind of campaign, as a campaign that has the right to do that, then I don't want to, you know, I'm like, okay, I distance myself. And I couldn't find it, but there's this amazing quote from June Jordan where she speaks about how, you know, that in this film that I made, A Place of Rage, about June Jordan and Angela Davis, and she says, you know, that when she was in the UC Berkeley campus, and one day she goes to this a kind of a protest against the Iraq war, and there's hundreds of people there, and she's speaking at it, and there's hundreds of people who turned up. And the very next day, she goes to an LGBTQ protest, and there's very few people, and that protest is also not acknowledging in any way what's happening nationally, what's happening internationally, and the kind of ways in which America had been invading Iraq and the protest against it. So this kind of, you know, false demarcations, I think are something that what excites me about all of your work is that, you know, it's a complete rejection of all that, that there is a very different agenda that you all are kind of working with and building here. And the space that, you know, Paula and Sandeep and Sylvia and, you know, Soraya, I mean, all of you are creating with this decolonial conferences and which I've never been to before. I think it's really great that we're able to have these conversations across so many different time zones and countries and art practices and academic scholarship practices.
Please, Ochi, you wanted to say something? I can't say that in Spanish, Sylvia. Ochi wants to speak.
Ochi, ¿querías compartir con nosotros?
Sí, dos cosas. Primero, yo creo que un espacio decolonial, primero quiero agradecer a Silvia las posibles traducciones que está haciendo, pero se hace muy difícil seguirles a la mayoría. Y yo creo que esto es una cuestión política. O sea, si realmente queremos derribar las fronteras nacionalistas, la traducción tiene que ser una prioridad. Y la traducción en todo el sentido que podamos entender el sentido de las demás personas, ¿no?
¿quieres que te haga la traducción más o menos simultánea? Sí.
Por favor.
So Ochi is saying that whilst she is very grateful that I have been trying to translate on the messenger here as everything was taking place, there is obviously a disconnect between the two temporalities. And so this is not just a disconnect. This is really a profound political question. And so because we are all occupying different spaces, translation is absolutely central. And because we are thinking about the decolonial space, translation is actually absolutely central. And this is a political question.
Okay, the first. La segunda es que sería interesante también ver dónde estamos haciendo arte decolonial, ¿no? Porque muchas veces estamos en metrópolis, donde queremos cuestionar la lógica colonial, racista que está al interior, pero muchas veces también limitamos la relación que podemos tener, por ejemplo, con zonas que son tan importantes en la geopolítica internacional, que en general no hacemos trabajo ni consideramos esas conexiones. Y lo digo, por ejemplo, con Gran Bretaña, con América Latina, Estados Unidos con América Latina. Es decir, yo creo que la geopolítica, el espacio geopolítico es muy importante para también tejer, digamos, esos puentes que decía Prativa a nivel transnacional, ¿no? Entonces pensemos también en estrategias de cómo aquellas zonas que colonialmente no han sido suficientemente reconocidas, cómo podemos establecer más conexiones, porque lo único que nos va a salvar va a ser la solidaridad transnacional desde la gente subalterna, ¿no?
Okay, voy a intentar resumir a ver si tengo todos los puntos. So it would be, of course, the second point, then it would be interesting to think about where exactly we are doing art. From which decolonial spaces are we doing art? So sometimes we are located in spaces that are metropolitan spaces. So there are centers, really. And they're urban centers, they're metropolitan spaces. And of course, this leaves out a range of zones or areas that we really should think about. And we should think about this geopolitically. So of course, we've spoken about, you know, the relations between the UK and Latin America and the US, and so on and so forth. But we really have to think about how to connect all these other zones that might not be, or areas that might not be metropolitan areas. And I think that's where the question really lies, also in terms of thinking about this as a geopolitical question. And a question that's really central to the decolonial project because of the project of building solidarity, not just between metropolitan centers, but also with these other areas or zones or places that are marginal.
Thank you, Silvia.
Aruni, did you want to come in? I thought your presentation really spoke to, you know, the concerns that Ochi is raising now. Creo que la presentación que Aruni hizo trató de esas cuestiones, ¿no? De esas áreas marginales. Aruni, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for raising those questions. I was really stimulated by Ochi's presentation, and I want to say that once again, because I think you talked about how you use identity, how identity is one of the mediums through which many different powerful oppressive structures are interrogated. You know, I can speak about the decolonial space in my context as a writer who holds an Indian passport, who is from a marginalized, problematic region, a racialized region. I think that as literary artists, especially who are from India, I think one way we can actually work to decolonize literature is, especially if you are an Indian English writer, is to actually have very strong relationship with actually regional languages. And I'm able to say this because I actually wrote for many years, for almost 10, 12 years in Assamese. Since my childhood, I have been publishing and writing in Assamese language. It was an accident that my first published book was in English, and I have always been a bilingual writer. And this space has actually been extremely emancipating and empowering to me, because I not only get the luxury of inhabiting, you know, two literary cultures, but I can also choose to which literary culture I want to draw nourishment from. So when somebody says, what kind of a writer are you? Are you an Indian English writer or an artist writer? I always go back and say, I'm actually an Assamese writer in the cultural and literary sense, because I'm always richer when I draw from a language and a tradition and a regular print culture that has been in consistent production since the 5th century, instead of drawing from an Indian English literary tradition that is probably a few hundred years old. Of course, I have been enriched by all the things that I have read, but I think if you are to ask me to choose what kind of writer you are in a literary sense, in a literary tradition sense, I always say I belong to this long tradition that started in the 5th century and continues till today. And I think that I think that is my space of decolonization, and that is from where I operate. If I were to respond to Ochi's queries.
Sylvia, would you like to translate to Ochi, or are you?
I'm translating on.
Okay. Alexandra, Pratibha, probably you want to come in?
Yeah, I think there's, you know, Ochi's point is really, really pertinent and crucial for us to be thinking about what she's talking about in terms of the zones outside of the metropolitan centers. And Aruni, you know, I really appreciate how on your insistence on being an Assamese writer, and from where that, you know, how that is what your work is informed by, is your location and the specificity of that location. But you know, this is just nothing formulated, and I'm just thinking this out aloud with everyone. But for someone like me, who was born in Kenya, whose parents came from India, who lived in England, now lives in the US, somebody who is kind of being formed by dispersal, by diaspora, that how do we, you know, what is the sort of, that there isn't a kind of a binary in a way of the metropolitan centers and the other zones outside of that, but that the diasporic kind of, and the dispersal of my people and my family and my ancestors, and then my own life in terms of the kind of choices I've made about where I live, only, you know, as an adult, because I had no choice when we had to leave Kenya and to go be immigrants in England. That for my work visually is sort of so much informed by those multiplicity of those kind of geographic, cultural kind of histories that I inhabit in many ways. But also that, you know, there's a kind of part of my agenda at times as a visual artist has been, and a filmmaker has been, to actually kind of to disrupt the spaces of the metropolitan centers and the kind of the dominant media within that, so that I have, you know, really pushed against those doors and walls of mainstream media and tried to create and carve out a space within television, which is watched by millions of people. So that when, for instance, I made the documentary A Place of Rage on African-American women and the civil rights movement, that when that went out on primetime television in England, there had never been before that any kind of storytelling within that space that gave agency to and made sure that it was the voices of Black women, who artists and activists, which were foregrounded, and that they were given the space to speak to their own narrative. And, you know, it was kind of, it came home to me how important that kind of intervention is in terms of mainstream media, when I was hearing stories of how Black women, women of color at bus stops would kind of speak to each other about, did you see that film the other day on TV? And the kind of collective affirmation of a certain kinds of stories and subjectivities that were being given that sort of space in mainstream media. And to me, that was a kind of an important interjection and an intervention. And I mean, that no longer exists because the spaces for the so-called mainstream spaces have closed doors. But that there are other ways in which I'm trying to tell my stories. But I think that it just brings up this kind of, you know, it complicates this notion of the metropolitan center and then the other zones that are not so centered.
Alexandre, would you like to add, or shall we, if you'd like to add something, Alexandre?
I have, it's not so much as a question, but I'm really I'm just in my head and deeply listening to everybody. And maybe it's a question for everybody, but I'm right now working and very interested by the concepts that are being concepts from the marketing area that are, I feel, intertwined in our everyday language, you know, now, and everyday news, everyday lives. We are being fed with the words fake stories, you know, from Donald Trump, like fake stories. Now more and more the public have access to very strong tools to produce what are called deep fakes, when you can, you know, paste the face of someone on another video. You have these kind of images. You can produce now like voice. You produce voice. You can feed an AI with speeches from someone and then create something out of nowhere that they never said before, just by giving them previous talks from someone. So, and when I hear people on the panel, I hear the word storytelling. I know that it does not, I think, essentially comes from marketing, but now it's so deeply tied with it. And I hear the word narratives and of course the fiction. And maybe I want to ask globally, because it's something that I'm asking myself. But you know, all these tools are the tools of they have an agenda. They have capitalist agenda for the marketing, for rebranding things, for storytelling, to sell things to people. When you have the pink washing, when we saw someone in the conference talking about how the Israel state is doing pink washing with the army to rebrand the Israelis army. How we have like some things that big brands have a feminist storytelling now to kind of sell. So I maybe globally wanted to ask the other panelists how they were feeling about the words, how they think we can, because I really wanted to do a project about this, because essentially for me, these tools, these fake stories, the AIs who can, you know, instantly work, you know, articles and stuff. There are things like that now. They can produce fake stories and flood the internet with it. So this is pretty scary. And I wanted to know if people we're thinking about how we can repossess the marketing tools and the marketing narratives that the capitalist and white power agenda, like how we can, you know, like divert this kind of flux and repossess them. And maybe because we just like are targets with these narratives and these medium, and how can we finally, maybe, how can we transform them? Should we reshape, or can we just use them as they are and try to use this, you know, huge how can you say, like, possibilities that they offer? Because most of the time we are at the other end of the, not like tunnel, but the barrel. So how can we make use of these tools? It's just something that I feel that we are always prisoners or targets of them. But how can we turn these tools into positivity, maybe?
We would like to inform as well that we have only 3 to 4 minutes left because we're already over 10 minutes. So if the panelists would like to respond, 1 or 2 panelists, that would be great. I'm really sorry if we could carry on these conversations forever.
Sorry.
We have another panel at 7, sorry. Yeah.
Tools as in like social media and all of that. Yeah, I don't have it on my phone. And I keep my phone downstairs before going to sleep. That's the only solution I have. And I always think that if somebody is really desperately trying to contact me, they'll find a way. I don't have any of the apps on my phone. I don't have it, basically.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly just say to what you know, Alexandra is asking, and there's just so much more to say, but
yes.
And just, I'll be really quick about that, is that I think, you know, we, this kind of neoliberal agenda, as you're saying, you know, of co-opting language of storytelling, co-opting language of feminism, co-opting the rage and the resistance, is something that, you know, I just think that we have to continue to be absolutely totally vigilant to, and call each other on it, discuss what, you know, sometimes those things are so insidious that we don't realize how we are being kind of, yeah, you know, taken in by it. And so I think it's about keeping a certain vigilance and collective vigilance, as well as a kind of individual vigilance. But I think you're really absolutely spot on to bring it up as an area of some that we have to be acutely aware of.
Very insidious.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is a whole new conference and a panel that, Alex, you have actually been able to inaugurate almost. I mean, I'm really worried about the very shallow and dangerous tentacles of the neoliberal world and the neoliberal conversation, because it guises itself as good and actually is doing much harm.
Yeah, because I always like kind of thinking, you know, these things that pop up, and now I see technology that we did not have access to like maybe a year from now. And now I see like a tools called Deep Nostalgia. And it's a tool, maybe you have seen some images of that can animate pictures from your ancestors, and any pictures can now be given a voice and an animation that also fits the voice and the movements from the lips and stuff. So it's now we have access to so much powerful algorithms that's just like frightening, and always we see these agendas being used toward fascist agendas. And I've never seen someone trying to create fake news to promote good stories, or I don't know if it's a good thing to try. I don't know.
No, but I think, Alexander, we on one level, I think we have to, you know, learn and kind of commandeer any of these sort of new technologies that are out there, because I think that there are some younger artists who are kind of commandeering and taking on these sort of new ways of telling stories and creating stories to the kind of ends that would align with our agendas and align with our worldviews. And I think that we can't, I think technology is advancing so fast that in terms of storytelling, of all kinds of different storytelling, we have to ensure that, you know, with my students, I am like always saying that they have to learn these technologies to be able to tell the stories of what it means to be a young Black man coming from the South, or, you know, what, or if the different way, the conventional narrative ways of telling stories are no longer the ways in which people are going to consume those stories, that find the ways that they will, but tell the stories you want to tell on your terms. And I think that it's really important.
Ochi, does Sylvia, Ochi, does she want to?
Sí, Ochi, como te estaba contando, Prativa decía que tenemos que aprender cuál es la potencialidad y cómo usar estas nuevas herramientas, ¿no? No sé si tienes algún comentario sobre la cuestión que nos ponía Alexander.
Es que no logro continuar la conversación, okay. Es muy difícil.
Sí, muy difícil.
O sea, sé que Silvia hace todo el esfuerzo para traducirme las ideas, pero no logro conectarme. Disculpen, pero no puedo hacerlo.
No, claro. ¿Quieres hacer algún otro comentario para poder cerrar la mesa?
No, está todo bien. Muchas gracias.
Muy bien, gracias, Ochi.
So nothing from Ochi? Okay, all right. So I think nous avons fini. We have finished.